Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. You can send questions for each show on Twitter using the hashtag IndieBeacon. Now sit back and enjoy learning about our guest for this show.
Good evening, everyone. This is presenter, model awarded author, and your radio show host, Shanalee Charbonneau. Welcome to the show. This evening, I am on the radio show with very astounding Texan, I should say, veteran and talented author, stan-corvin-jr. So, Stan, welcome to the show, dear.
Thank you very much, Shanalee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we should be thanking you, dear. So we had a little time to chat this morning. And, you know, I think what's very interesting about people who write books and authors that, you know, their books are so enveloping and they write good stories, but sometimes we forget to kind of learn about the author. We spoke this morning about your record in the Army, and I would love for you to share that story and what record you hold in the Army and what happened to you.
Okay, I'll be glad to tell you a little bit about that. I'm a guy from West Texas. My father was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and from 1939 to 1970, he retired as a colonel. My mother was a school teacher, taught on Air Force bases that we lived in various places around the world. I grew up in West Texas mostly because my dad was stationed overseas a lot. Went to school at Texas Tech for undergraduate, and I was in law school in 1966, and I got drafted into the United States Army as a private E1, lowest-ranking member of the military I could be in, and had no intentions of going in the military, but the draft was on at the time. So I had a pilot's license and an instrument rating at that time. I'd gotten as a civilian, and so I applied for the helicopter flight training school and was accepted, and went through Army helicopter flight training and graduated from that in December of 1967. Went to Vietnam in January of 68, just in time for the 1968 Tet Offensive. And so I was spent the next 18 months flying helicopters. At first I flew the big Hueys that had crews, and we resupplied various special forces bases up in the northern part of South Vietnam in what was called I Corps. And then I decided that I wanted to do something a little more exciting, so I applied for the training and was accepted to fly a low-level reconnaissance with a hunter-killer team that was stationed at the same base at Chulai where I was. And so for the next 16 months, I flew low-level recon looking for the enemy and in many cases finding them, and they shot at me, and I shot at them too. Then I spent 2 years in Germany flying Cobra gunships along the East German Czechoslovakian border, and then was recruited and volunteered to go back to Vietnam in 1971 through 72 to fly for the CIA. And so from the old Special Forces compound outside of Da Nang, Vietnam, in the northern part, I flew for the CIA. And then the record that you're talking about is basically on April 29th of 1972, towards the end of my second tour, I received an emergency call that an Air Force fighter pilot had been shot down and had bailed out in the Quezon area of the A Shau Valley, right by the Laotian and North Vietnamese border. So my crew and I was a captain at the time, Army captain. I decided to go try to find this Air Force major, and Took us about an hour to get there. We found him, but in the process of finding him, I got shot my helicopter got shot very badly. The engine quit, and I crashed. 5 minutes later, the rescue helicopter picked us up, and we flew over the same 51 caliber machine gun that shot us down the first time, and so I went down again, and the aircraft crashed and burned. So I've held the record for being shot down the most times in 5 minutes, which is 2 times in 5 minutes.
Wow.
After I was shot down the second time, I crawled out of the burning helicopter, and I'd broken my back because I was sitting on the floorboard of the second helicopter when we crashed. And as I crawled out of the burning helicopter and attempted to get to my crew members, I was shot 5 times in the chest and the stomach by an enemy AK-47. And then I spent the next 13 hours on the ground with my crew and the other crew, basically fighting off 12,500 North Vietnamese Army soldiers that were trying to capture and kill us. But I survived, and that's all in my book.
Wow.
The story is the last chapter of my book.
You know, I appreciate you telling that story because we love our, military, we respect them, but it's very few times that you can really hear what somebody goes through and what might be going through their head and
Sure.
and their will to survive and their will to fight for this country. So again, I can't thank you enough, and to all those people, military veterans and current military active that are out there doing that. So again, thanks. So you do mention that that was your motivation in writing. Is it the Vietnam Saga, Exploits of a Combat Helicopter Pilot? Is that your book that you were discussing?
Yes, it is. I actually got out of the military about a year and a half later, and I was a captain and resigned my commission and got into the banking business and spent the next 40 years as a banker and owner of investment banking firms and various mortgage companies, things like that. Then 4 years ago, I retired from the banking business and decided that my wife and I have a large family. We have 7 grown children and 15 grandchildren. And for many, many years, my kids and my grandkids have said, Pop, you need to write a book about your time flying helicopters in Vietnam. So about 4 years ago, my wife was asked to help start a Christian school at our church. She's been a school teacher for 40 years. And so I was alone at the house by myself, and so I decided that was time to start my writing career. And I sat down, and in the course of 5 months, I wrote 90,000 words, 305 pages, which made up Vietnam Saga, Exploits of a Combat Helicopter Pilot. And then I contacted a good friend of mine who was with a large publishing company in Nashville, Tennessee. Had been with them for many years, and asked him if there was some way that I could have 7 copies of the book printed to give to my 7 children. And so he asked me to send him the manuscript. He said he'd try to find a place they could do it. He called me back about 2 days later and said, Stan, you have got to let me publish this thing. It's the most incredible story I've ever read about the military. And so had never thought about publishing a book or anything, and decided that I would let Wayne, my friend, do that. And so he walked me through the process of getting it edited, and then on Amazon and Kindle, and then I did Barnes and Noble, and then I did a process where I was able to get it in 3,900 Air Force and Army post exchanges around the world. So it's sold worldwide in all the military bases in their post exchanges and base exchanges. So after that, I decided that really enjoyed the writing. And one thing I didn't say is that while my 3 years in Vietnam, one of the things that I did to maintain my sanity basically was to take spiral-bound notebooks, each with about 200 pages in it, and I wrote every night something. Many times it was just stream of consciousness. Other times it was stories about what had happened during the day. Other times it was poetry. Other times it was just prose that I created every night. And in the course of 3 years that I was in Vietnam, I filled up 6 spiral-bound notebooks with 200 pages each. So that was about 1,200 pages of writing that I did that was contemporaneous with my service in Vietnam. But I never intended to use any of it for anything. And in fact, about 6 years ago, when I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, I decided it was time that I got rid of all of my Vietnam remembrances. So I took all of the notebooks, went to my fire pit down at a patio, brick patio outside the house, and I burned all of them. But I remembered the stories, and it was from those stories that I wrote in that book that I created an outline 4 years ago, and from my outline I wrote the book Vietnam Saga, Exploits of a Combat Pilot. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, that's an amazing story. I mean, I can see on Amazon you've got, a 4.5-star rating out of 32 customer reviews, and I believe you said there's 115 total reviews with good reads included, and obviously the book is exciting. It's well received and loved because you're getting high reviews. I'm sure when you were crawling out of that helicopter, you would never have thought you would see your name on Amazon.com and people accepting your wonderful story, did you?
No, absolutely not. I had no intentions of anything other than trying to stay alive. And the way I stayed alive is the last chapter in the book. It's a fairly lengthy chapter, but it is an incredible story that I never could have conceived at all. And I'm not going to tell anybody what the story is. You got to buy the book to learn what the story is all about. But it is truly a miracle that I survived for 13 hours on the ground after being shot so badly and laying there and basically bleeding out. But I didn't bleed out entirely. So,
well,
anyway.
Here's what I believe. I think God saved you for good reason. And we're gonna talk more about that reason when we come back. I am Shanley Charbonneau talking to the beloved Stan-Corvin-Jr., veteran and author for the Vietnam Saga.
Attention all ebook authors. Are you looking for the perfect place to sell your ebooks? Look no further than ebg247.com. Get your ebooks listed on our front page with a real-time royalty tracking dashboard and receive 80% of all your sales. That's ebg247.com. Why go anyplace else? No matter what your book genre or its cost, we make it the perfect place to sell your stories. That's ebg247.com. It's the web's best place to sell all your ebooks.
Howdy, I'm John Cruder, the Midnight Marauder. I guess you might say that I'm a vigilante who rights the wrongs I see along my many travels to balance the scales of justice, especially those of the corrupt and murderous members of the Town Council of Bandera, Texas. You can follow my many adventures in a series of Midnight Marauder books written by Roy Clinton on Amazon.com and TopWesterns.com. Or if you prefer, listen to my adventures in audiobook form by downloading them from Audible.com or iTunes. This is R. William James, the voice of the Midnight Marauder.
Hello, Texas authors. My name is Randy James, coming to you from my Carrollton recording studio, where I spend time writing and producing commercials for my radio endorsement clients, as well as my private freelance clients. I'd like the opportunity to help you sell more books with a commercial like this and get listeners of Dear Texas Radio excited about your title, all at a special introductory price. Available to members of the Texas Association of Authors. Call or text 214-762-1942. That's 214-762-1942.
Bourgeois Media and Consulting, a book publishing consultant where creative inspiration is realized. More at bourgeoismedia.com.
Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. You can send questions for each show on Twitter using the hashtag IndieBeacon. Now sit back and enjoy learning about our guest for this show.
Good evening, y'all. This is Shanalee Charbonneau. I have the esteemed pleasure to be on the phone with awarded author Stan-Corvin-Jr. He is the author of The Vietnam Saga, and we just left off on talking about how wonderful his purpose in life has become. So, one of the things we spoke about, Stan, is you talk about something that all authors only dream to possibly do. And do you recall what we were talking about with this book?
I'm not sure I do. Can you give me a hint?
So we were talking, I can give you a hint. You were talking about there are some people that potentially are reviewing this to make the Vietnam Saga book an actual movie.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure if that's what you're talking about. Yes. As a matter of fact, after writing Vietnam Saga, good to follow the chain of events, a good friend of mine contacted me about 2 weeks after it came out, and he asked me to write his book for him. It's Major General Carl G. Snyder from Rawls, Texas, and he's a two-star general that served immediately at the end of World War II, and then for the next 32 years, rising from the rank of a private to a two-star general. So I spent a couple of months interviewing him and took those notes and transcribed them and made it into a book called Jet Pioneer, a fighter pilot's memoir. Then I guess it was this past January, I started working on a book called Echoes of the Hunt. And I'm a West Texas guy. I grew up with a family near San Angelo, Texas, and hunted on that ranch as a kid. And my grandfather lived in Levelland, Texas, and owned a couple of oil companies, and I hunted with him too. So I wrote a book called Echoes of the Hunt, which is me on basically a deer hunt about 5 or 6 years ago when I was nearing 70 years of age. And while I was hunting alone for the next 10 days, in the evenings I would record memories of me hunting as a child with my family members. And my earliest memory was when I was 5 years old, sitting on my grandfather's lap at a stock tank out near Whiteface, Texas, near the New Mexico border. And I shot a duck, my very first duck, when I was 5 years old. And so that book was published about 3 months ago. I published it about 3 months ago. And I've been contacted by several people to take both books and combine them into a screenplay, which I'm working on right now, to be made into potentially a movie that will include my time in Vietnam for 3 years flying helicopters and my time as an older man on a deer hunt, remembering my youth and the hunting adventures that I went on with my father, my grandfather, and my uncles. And so hopefully something will come of that by the first of this year. That's what I'm expecting. So That's what I'm working on now is the screenplay to combine both Vietnam Saga and Echoes of the Hunt into one movie script.
Now we talked a little bit, as we know, coming out of war, we're so very concerned right now in the media about our veterans and PTSD and their general well-being, and I think we're doing what we can and need to do more until they're all healthy and realize that we respect them and we want them to live a full life post any war. But what was interesting to me is that you gave an interesting discussion about when you went on this hunt, what the conclusion was and what you did when you spotted a deer and hunting this deer, and maybe if you could kind of tie in your thoughts of why you may not have decided to do what you didn't do. Do you know what I'm speaking about, Tim?
Yes, I do. Basically, the combining the two stories includes my time in Vietnam in warfare, where I was actually pulling a trigger on what was called an M134 minigun. It was a electric-fired Gatling gun mounted to my little helicopter as I was flying low level on the ground looking for the bad guys. And for 16 months, I did nothing but kill them. Then my story about me hunting the big deer about 5 years ago, I tell the stories of me hunting and being on various adventures with my grandfather, father, and uncles as a child. But in the end, I have the opportunity to kill what's called a non-typical mule deer that had so many points, horns, that I couldn't count them all. And I had him in my sights and had my finger on the trigger, and he was 80 yards away, and it was a sure shot. But after 10 days of stalking him and hunting him and finding him, I chose not to shoot him. Yeah. Now, that's the end of the book. So I've just told you the way the book ends. So don't tell anybody. Hopefully nobody's listening to this. But I tell you that because basically what I'm doing is showing the kind of the juxtaposition of me being a young soldier killing the enemy and an old man choosing not to kill a deer. And the people that have contacted me about the movie have found that to be an interesting and compelling story. So that's what I'm working on.
Amazing. I know that that probably was hard on you, and I have spoken to other veterans, and they said that one of the things they love to do after seeing so much death and that they come back in a place where they just want to see life, whether it's, flowers or grass or wildlife or whatever. So, again, we don't understand that and appreciate the fact that you guys make that sacrifice so we can have grass and trees and freedom and wildlife without having any concern. So do you have some appearances coming up, dear? You're so interesting. You have such a great background, 2 Purple Hearts. I mean, we have to mention this. I think you have other awards that I'm failing to mention. Where are you going to be next? And can you talk a little bit, again, I know you touched on where your book's available.
Sure.
If you can kind of cover that. And your website, please.
Sure. The website is VietnamSaga.com. It's pretty easy. VietnamSaga, SAGA.com. And it's I've got one thing I did when I was a pilot in Vietnam is I carried a very small little Rolly 35 millimeter camera in my flight suit wherever I went, and I took hundreds of pictures, and many of them are on the website. A lot of them are in the book also. My second edition, I added about 30 or 40 pictures to the second edition of the Vietnam Saga. But the website contains lots of pictures and lots of information about my flying in Vietnam and since then, too. I've got about 12,500 hours flying time, about half of that in helicopters, the other part in airplanes. I've been a pilot for a long, long time. But what you're speaking about is the upcoming event is in August. There is a group of fighter pilots that are having a convention in Dallas, Texas. It's called the Big 22 Convention, and it's the 22nd fighter group out of Bitburg, Germany, where various members of the group are going to meet for a convention. Buzz Aldrin was in that group. My friend General Carl Snyder was his commanding officer in the 50s. They're in that group, and they're all going to meet in Dallas, and I have been asked to join the group and to speak to them about my flying in Vietnam and being awarded 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses as well as 2 Purple Hearts. And one thing that I'm going to do is to record many of these gentlemen who are all 90 years old plus. I think Buzz is 89 now, actually. I've talked to him a few times, and he wrote the foreword for General Snyder's book. I actually wrote the foreword for him, and he signed it. So anyway, they're going to be at that convention, and I'm going to
What's the name of
record
the
a lot of
convention,
that.
Stan?
It's just called the Big 22 Convention, and it's only for invited guests.
Wonderful.
And so,
well, I can't tell you enough that we really appreciate you being on the show today. I think I'm going to the Big 22. I can tell you that. But this is the great Stan Corvin Jr., author of Vietnam Saga and Echoes of the Hunt. Thank you, Stan, for speaking to me. It was my honor, and just so appreciative to have your time this evening.
Well, Shauna Lee, I certainly appreciate you inviting me and interviewing me this evening. You're a wonderful lady, and God bless you, and God bless America.
God bless you, Stan. Good night, guys.
Texas Authors is proud to be a supporter of IndieBeacon.com, a website that supports indie authors from around the world. If you are looking for help with marketing or getting published, IndieBeacon.com can assist you. Years of experience by the founder is available to any indie author looking for help. IndieBeacon.com, a place for creative souls to find help in marketing their creations.
The Middle East continues to be a political hotbed. Author James E. Doucette's new novel, The Last Assassination, takes you into a web of intrigue and deceit. The findings shock the Washington establishment and will jolt the reader. Available at your favorite bookstore or at books.txauthors.com. Award-winning children's author Maria Ashworth has written books that deal with today's issues for children like bullying, friendship, blended families, love, and acceptance. Her recent release, Sushi Kitty, and other works can be found at mariaashworth.com or books.txauthors.com. Connect with her on Facebook and Twitter for speaking events and presentations.
This is Grace Allison. I am a mystic, a spiritual mystic who has been doing research in the world of psychology and mysticism for the past 40 years. And I've recently written a book that came from a dream, actually, called Do You Have a Dream Workbook? 5 Keys to Realize Your Dream. It's an award-winning book, won first place from the Texas Authors for spiritual inspirational works last year in 2017. So I'm really excited about this bestseller that has been capturing people's imagination and really helping people work with the hidden part of their unconscious and getting it free so that they can become more creative, more courageous, and more expressive in their lives. So this is a great book, and it's available on Amazon.
Thank you for listening to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. To learn more about Indie Beacon services, to be a guest on the show, or to advertise on our show, please visit our website at indiebeacon.com.